All right, we will be moving to our first panel, Tip of the Spear, report from the Frontlines of the War on Disinformation. So this panel's experts will be taking our audience through a journey on the front lines of the war on disinformation, shedding light on the latest tactics, technological advances, and trends. So I welcome our panel to take their seat, and Lee, we'll see you back up there.
So I want you all to know right off that I didn't get any turn downs for this panel. I got exactly the people that I wanted to speak to, all in person. Thank you very much for coming. But then again, how could anybody not want to be included in something called Tip of the Spear, a report from the front lines of the war on disinformation? Each of you are leaders in the fight against disinformation in journalism, in the military, in government, nonprofit sector. And we all know that there's an election coming up in November 2024 in the United States, but that's hardly the only threat that we face. I mean, disinformation hobbles us in many different ways every single day. Now, we're privileged today to be able to go first, to set the table for this wonderful three-day conference on disinformation and how to fight it. So I think that the best thing that we can do to start off is to get this sense of how you would all answer the question that I think is implicit in our session title, which is this: where do you think that we are today in the fight against disinformation? Are we winning or are we losing? What are the challenges on the horizon? What are the things that you're most worried about? And what are the things that no one else is talking about that you can bring up that we should be aware of? I don't know how many of you saw the article over the weekend in the New York Times that was talking about how Trump's allies are winning the war against disinformation. Who would like to go first?
I'll jump in. Thanks for having me, Lee. And I do want to start off with a little bit of a joke before I get into the darker stuff, is that every time I was looking at the conference agenda and like planning to get here and it was up in a little tab, I kept thinking that the conference was my Twitter tab, which I don't really look at anymore because the X of the logo looks so much like X on the new X of Twitter. So anyway, just thought that was funny. Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here. It's my first time in Austin, although I almost went to graduate school here. For those of you that don't know me, I've had a pretty tumultuous past 2 years. Around this time in 2022, I was appointed to lead a body within the Department of Homeland Security called the Disinformation Governance Board, which is a really bad name that I was not responsible for. And this was an internal coordination body that was meant to make policy and share best practices within DHS, which is a behemoth organization in the US federal government. I had never seen myself at DHS. I'm more of a foreign policy person, but my country called, and I thought that I could use my expertise to help and to steer the ship a little bit. Unfortunately, what happened was immediately when this effort was announced in a kind of ham-fisted way by the government, folks on the far right, and frankly some on the far left as well, talked about it as if it were a censorship body. They called me a minister of truth. I was on the front cover of the New York Post. Fox News talked about me in every hour segment for the first 3 weeks after the announcement, and frankly for many months afterward. And I got threats. We were doxxed. I've been depicted in deepfake porn. I was pregnant at the time, so none of this was particularly pleasant on its face, but especially in that situation, it was also bad, even more bad. I just want to kind of start off by saying that was the beginning of, I think, what we've seen and what you just referenced, Lee, of a 2-year-long campaign to shut down people who are doing research about disinformation. And as we sit here today, the Supreme Court is hearing oral argument in the case Murthy v. Missouri, formerly Missouri v. Biden, which is a case ostensibly about what is proper communication between the US government and social media platforms. On its face, that's what it's about. But it is a case that is full of conspiracy theories, inaccuracies, false allegations, and frankly, it is a politicized effort to do what I just said. It's one of the kind of broad coordinated campaign that we are experiencing right now. And I just saw, as Peter was giving his talk, I got a push notification that one of the justices did reference, in fact, one of the falsehoods that is embedded in the case. So it's made it all the way up into the Supreme Court, and that justice has bought into those allegations as well. This has meant that researchers have been buried under document requests and subpoenas. I myself spent 5 hours with Jim Jordan talking about my 11 weeks of government service before I resigned. And I've been sued. I was actually a party in Murphy v. Missouri, and originally I was able to get out of that, but I've had, frivolous legal allegations, all sorts of things. I have a stalker. This is serious. I think that this is the most existential threat to freedom of expression and academic integrity that the United States has faced since the McCarthy era. And we've kind of been asleep at the wheel. Not only is the US government not doing, in my opinion, enough to fight disinformation, both in the regulatory sphere and in kind of the policy response sphere, the media has been, to some extent, asleep at the wheel, with the exception of some great reporting from the Times and a few other organizations. Some of the media has been actively participating in this, which is why I'm suing Fox News for defamation. And frankly, nobody seems to care, because it's just some nerds who research the internet, right? But it's not just going to be nerds who research the internet soon. It's going to be people looking at climate science. It's going to be people looking at, anything that's holding power to account. And I don't think we really understand how, or acknowledge how information is integral to the discussions that we're having in our democracy every day. So, I think we're losing. I think we're losing badly, and I'm very worried about what the next couple of months are going to bring before the election.
I'm sitting next to Nina, so I will go next. Where are we in the fight? I think we, over the past, let's call it 5 years, have taken 2 steps forward, and then giving on the day, we take 1 to 20 steps back. At the current moment, it's not looking good. I have made several major life decisions predicated on the fact that this is not only an election year in the US, it's a global election mega cycle. Something close to half of the world's population is set to go to the ballot box this year. And that's terrifying given the information ecosystem that we're living in, and the fact, and Peter and Lee referenced this earlier, and the fact that not many people seem to be fully engaged in that ecosystem. I'm a part of the ecosystem. I'm a reporter for the New York Times. That excellent story that Lee referenced earlier was not written by me. It's written by one of my colleagues, Steve Lee Myers, and Jim Rutenberg. Nina's actually quoted in it. And I highly recommend that everyone read it, because it gives a really in-depth look at how we got to this point today in the political war against disinformation, and it really is a war. You have figures really across the political spectrum that have raised questions about what disinformation is, what are valid efforts to fight disinformation, and really whether or not disinformation is something that should be fought, which is something that is especially concerning to me, because I think the answer to that is very clear, right? Disinformation is something that is affecting our reality, and combined with some of the technological advances that we've seen, AI being first and foremost among them, it's really something that everyone should be quaking in their boots about. I would say that there are things that to me are promising. Nina mentioned that much of the media is complicit in not solving this issue, not doing enough to address the issue, sometimes participating in the issue. I think that's true. I would also say, though, that at the New York Times, for example, I'm part of a team, right? It's Stephen Lee Myers, Stuart Thompson, and myself. And the fact that there are entities like the New York Times, government entities, private research entities, that are putting so much, that are giving so much attention to this issue is heartening. I think the fact that this is now truly a community that's come together to fight and address disinformation is a good step. The fact that you all largely know each other, you've read each other's work, that I have access to your work so that I can report it out, gives me some level of hope. But I'll close on this. I was talking to another colleague of mine not too long ago, and I tell this story a lot. And I was telling her, you know, my jaw really hurts for some reason. Ever since I took this job about 2 years ago. I don't know why, but my jaw is like aching. She's like, you're clenching your teeth. It's part of the job. And all I do is report on this and write about it. I'm not really fully in the trenches like people like Nina are. And I would just say that the average person out there doesn't realize how much strain is on the people who are actually fighting this war. That we're all humans, and this is really a human problem. It's created by humans. It's exacerbated by humans, and it's going to take human cooperation to solve it.
So I guess we're going in chair order. So very difficult to follow both Tiffany and Nina, but I shall give it a shot. So I'm at the Army Cyber Institute, and I have been, for the last 5 years or so, trying to convince the Army that all of the data that's being collected on all of us every single day, by the devices that we carry around, by the cameras everywhere, by all of the sensors, is the existential threat that is driving the mis and disinformation problem set. This is not, so fun fact about me, Nazis always come up in the first 5 minutes, so here we go. Like there's been Nazis on the internet since the internet started, right? Like one of the first internet forums in the 90s was a neo-Nazi forum, right? The Nazis on the internet isn't the problem. The problem is the algorithms that are helping them find each other. The same math that helps the gay kid in Nebraska find other gay people to realize that, hey, I'm okay, right, is the exact same math that helps the Nazi do the same thing. That's really the challenge that we're dealing with, is all of this data is collected on us. We have no idea how. We have no idea what the inferences are. We have no access to it. And so we can't answer the questions about what is going on with the algorithmic decisions that is pushing, right, all of the information to us. There's a tendency in this space to use, human analogs to talk about the problem of the public sphere, right? So if I go down to the public sphere and, yell with a bullhorn, it's the same thing as, posting on Twitter or Facebook. No, it's not, because fundamentally a tweet or a post, I refuse to call it Twitter, or refuse to call it X, I just can't. These are fundamentally not limited by the bounds of geography and physics, right? It is fundamentally different. So one of the things that I think we've got to think about is, as we think about the law and we think about how do we rein some of this in, right? If we keep focusing on the content problem, we're going to keep playing whack-a-mole, right? You have a First Amendment right to receive foreign disinformation, right? That doesn't mean that we should be giving a broadcast license to Russia Today. I was down in D.C. at some point in the last couple of years. I very much appreciated Peter's point about time changing. And there's a radio station that's Russia Today. Why? Like, why would we do that? I don't understand why we would allow that in any way, shape, or form. We've got to start taking action to think through, how do we protect the data that is being collected on us, right? And oh, by the way, the radio that you're listening to is collecting that information, who's in the car, what have you, and then now you've got a data point on you that you're listening to Russia Today. Which is fine in theory, right? But then who goes all the way down that rabbit hole? What data is about each of us that figures out, what are you susceptible on? When I first started in this space, I had read Chris Wiley's fantastic book, sorry for cussing, Mindfuck, it's the title. I highly recommend it. And, I was like, oh my gosh, who are the persuadables, right? That's the wrong question. It really is, right? From an election perspective, okay, fine, that's the right question. But from an information perspective, right? It's not who are the persuadables, it's what are you persuadable on? Right? I mean, Nina just had a baby a couple of years ago, right? I don't know how new moms are navigating the mommy sphere, right? Because it was bad 20 years ago when mine were young. The anti-vax information, the all of the stuff is like, it's so much worse now. And the people that are driving this are financially incentivized to drive this, right? There's a grift involved. There is a fraud aspect involved in this, right? So you go, especially what, I'm going to just use the first-time mom, analog here, right? You go to the doctor, they take your heartbeat, they check your growth, they check your weight, check your blood pressure, maybe check your blood sugar. Good luck, see you next month. And you're like, wait, I'm growing a thing inside of me and I could use a little bit more support here, right? You give birth, you maybe get 24 hours in the hospital. Here, good luck, go home. Like, wait, where's the handbook? Is there anybody I can call? Like, what's normal? What's not, right? So we think about new moms in this space, right? Trying to find information about this massively transformational event that they just went through. They go to the internet. And the internet is designed right now, and generative AI is only making it worse, to push financially incentivized content, right? Getting to the actual doctors, being able to ask a doctor a question, right? Most Americans don't have a family doctor. So during the pandemic, when we said, oh, go talk to your doctor, who has a doctor that they can actually talk to? Very, very few people. So there are structural issues underlying all of this problem space, and it's not about fixing the information environment is fixing a symptom, right? The underlying structural issues are much bigger, and it's going to require a lot more work and money and effort to rebuild things, to rebuild the trust that enables a healthy information environment. So.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me here. Probably not a lot of people know me. My name is Osadchuk. I'm a research associate at the DFR Lab, and I research disinformation. I'm usually based in Kyiv, so I arrived a week ago or something. And about your questions. So first of all, I've heard a lot of times that Ukraine won information war. I disagree. It was truthful maybe like first half a years of the invasion. But now it's not that true. Russians are learning as well. They are changing their tactics. They are changing methodologies that they are using. So, for instance, at the beginning, there were like these dumb messages that like, oh, we will calm down and denazify you, and like you just need to, I don't know, wait and everything will be fantastic. We're not shelling civilians. Of course, it was like shattered in the first few seconds, right, or the minutes of the invasion when the civilian areas were bombed. But then they changed. The messages became cleverer. They started doing this interesting thing is that they're trying to fuel the internal tensions pretty heavily. They are monitoring our information space, yours as well, don't get me wrong. And they are doing it pretty well, and then like finding the weakest points and trying to double down on them and bring new problems and make problems bigger than they are. So in Ukraine, a lot of people perceive corruption as the biggest problem. And you know what? We see the largest influence operation on TikTok, claiming that Ukrainian leadership corrupt, from the mayors, draft commission officers to Zelensky. Everybody is corrupt, so you should not be fighting. You should not be defending and protecting Ukraine. What else? Another thing that actually bothers me is that a lot of people not taking disinformation seriously in multiple countries, but it actually has real-life things, real-life consequences, starting from the violence and the war. So I'll just remind you that before the invasion itself, for 2 months, almost every other week or almost daily, there were attempts to cook up some casus belli event, either like some nondescript building that blown under like Russian territory. Oh, it was an FSB building that probably FSB bombed themselves. Or, oh, Ukraine is about to attack this so-called republics. Or, oh, we should evacuate people from these so-called republics. And the video was filmed like 2 days. The video of this announcement was filmed 2 days prior actual announcement. And many, many other things. So Ukrainian civil society organizations, governmental representatives needed to refute these messages daily. And that's why Russia does not have any casus belli as far as we know, right? It's just their casus belli that they will go and denazify, but then now they're not even using this word, right? Because it does not make any sense, even for them. Finally, I would say that the efforts connected to this, they are hugely underfunded. Basically everywhere. In Ukraine, it's also visible, but hopefully we have a lot of like people that are working in civil society, robust civil society, but they could use more resources to do that. There is like, if you compare the budgets of Russia today, conglomerate, right? It will outspend, I don't know, multiple countries combined in their efforts. And this is only the visible thing. But if we talk about subcontractors that do this like troll and bot farms, like Anno Dialogue and like any others, there will be many more. So basically what you would be perceiving like on your social media, like random user, it would be like coming from some other channels of funding. So it's not that evident, and we do not know the exact amount of money, but it's a lot and much bigger than in other countries to counter this. And final note that I wanted to end here is that a lot of people perceive information space, especially in the West, as a place where you, I don't know, it's a marketplace of ideas. You just discuss, want to sell some goods, exchange some wonderful ideas. Russians are perceiving this as a battlefield, when they fight you, attack you, and where like some bullets should be shot. And that's fundamental difference that should be acknowledged before taking any actions, because if you're not understanding this basic thing, you cannot be efficient and effective in the country.
Wow. You guys make the job of moderator very, very easy. You invite the right people and get out of their way. I want to follow up with a question that ties together and moves us to the next level here of what we wanted to talk about today. One, there are tools to fight disinformation. People don't know them. And there's also an active war against, people understanding them. One of the scariest books that I read recently was the Handbook of Russian Information Warfare, which is a NATO training manual. It's by Keir Giles. You can get it. It's free on the internet. It's short, very scary book, which says we are already we're already at war with Russia. It's an information war. That is either will become part of a kinetic war, or they can achieve the goals without that. It's more than that, because foreign disinformation is not the only problem. Foreign disinformation is designed to be laundered as quickly as possible through a domestic information filter, because then it prevents the cyber warriors in the United States, the counterintelligence folks, from being able to fight it, given our Constitution. So, and one of the consciousness-raising things that I've, after reading that Handbook of Russian Information Warfare, is to realize this is domestic. That is the target, the foot soldiers. We're all warriors in this. It's not just government to government. Even if it's created by a foreign government, the target audience for disinformation is all of us as citizens. But there are books, there's work done that could help us. One I think of is Sander van der Linden's book, Foolproof, which talks about the virtues of pre-bunking, which is something that Biden did very well just before the Russian invasion. He said, look, he very quickly declassified the work and said, look, they're going to fake an atrocity, pretend that it's Ukraine. And once he debunked it, they couldn't use that. Now, of course, they found a different reason to get in. But here's the next issue that I want to get to. It has troubled me greatly recently to see the backlash against disinformation research, to see what Nina brought up at the beginning, the idea that, we know what Jim Jordan and others are doing, but we've also seen some of that backlash, and I'm not just talking about ignorance here, I'm talking about backlash from business leaders, even from journalists, from others, that has made me suspicious. Part of it is people who don't understand the issue, but part of it is just this disingenuous idea to just raise some questions about what disinformation really is and whether it can actually be fought. And I want to raise here some things that we've all heard, and here's some of your thoughts about what we can say about them and how to fight it. Because some of this backlash seems to me like it might be coordinated, like there might be something behind it. I know that sounds conspiratorial, and I'm going to take some heat for that. But you've seen these sorts of reactions coming, these questions raised like this. Again, it troubles me that academics, even some other philosophers, are raising these questions. Is disinformation even a coherent concept? Isn't this term used as a political weapon simply to undermine the opinion of those whose opinion you don't agree with? even if it does exist, is disinformation really that widespread? Can it swing an election? Aren't people already pretty good at knowing when they're being fooled? Isn't all this talk about disinformation just alarmism or even a moral panic? Isn't content moderation just censorship? We've all heard that one. And it's now made its way up to the Supreme Court. And the capper is, some people seem to be saying now that is what I think is a disingenuous idea. It's now made its way out as common sense to the American public. Let's just let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's just let everyone have a voice, and truth will rise to the top. And these are common refrains that you see now, not just from the Jim Jordans of the world, but it has made its way out as common wisdom, and it's extremely dangerous. In my own work, I've done a lot to try to make the argument that refusing to amplify someone else's lie is not censorship. You're just refusing to amplify the lie. So I wonder, and my question here to all of you has 3 parts, and you can go in any order that you want. It doesn't have to, I mean, you can engage one of however you want to do this. How do you react to this? Do you think that there is, in fact, a strategic denialist campaign going on with its own weaponized propaganda? Because, of course, part of disinformation is to mask the fact that it's disinformation. So there can be a disinformation war against the idea that disinformation is even real. And if it is a coordinated campaign, where's the evidence of it? I think the New York Times story made a very good, very needed consciousness-raising watermark to say, you didn't even know we were in this war, but we are, and we're losing. So I wonder what all of your reaction is to this. That is not just the disinformation war that we're in, but how do you combat the backlash? Because then we're fighting an even larger problem of public perception.
Let me muscle in first, just because we're talking about that story. So Steve and Jim's story did a really great job of laying out how various allies of Trump have come together or on their own, started attacking entities like the EIP, which is the Election Integrity Partnership, groups like CISA, individuals like Nina. So I'm gonna just, again, suggest that you read that story. I'm personally really interested, though, in kind of the cultural forces that allow those sorts of efforts to take root and grow, and that's something that I think we as journalists are going to be focused more on in this kind of election megacycle year, which is information fatigue in the general public. I think the fact, it's not so much whether or not people believe something that's wrong, and this is a theme that I suspect is going to come up repeatedly over the next few days. It's not so much trying to convince people of disinformation per se. I mean, that's definitely a problem. And it's not even convincing them that truth is not real or that they should mistrust what information is out there. It's just the fact that so many people are tired of thinking about this sort of thing in the first place, right? We've come out of 2016, we've come out of 2020, it's now 8 years after all of that's really kicked off in a major way. And, I talk to people across the spectrum. These are people with no college degrees. These are people with high educational levels. These are people in rural areas, people in cities, just really across the board. People just don't want to think about it anymore. And this is something that comes up a lot in just my experience as a disinformation reporter. My stories tend to be really well read, but not a lot of people want to engage with them in a really serious way other than parroting back what they already believe to be true. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed before we can talk about, well, if there is a coordinated effort to prevent real disinformation research, we have to get people to care. And this is something, again, that Lee and Peter were talking about earlier. But information fatigue is not just a problem in the US, it's happening around the world. And that's how you get feedback loops that allow disinformation to spread across countries, across platforms, in different languages. That's what makes it so hard to catch and to moderate and resolve a lot of these issues, because the lack of motivation to deal with it means that at the social media platforms, you don't have the kind of moderation capabilities that really sprung up in force after 2016 and to some extent after 2020. You know, there's a major scale back in a lot of those efforts. This is why you have a lot of people in the government who, because of the chilling effect that Steve and Jim wrote about, they don't want to tackle this right now. It's not really a priority for them, despite the fact that election disinformation is going to play a huge role in the votes that are coming up. And again, just not having the average American or the average world citizen aware or care that disinformation is something that really should be front of mind for them because it affects their interaction with reality, that's hugely concerning to me. If I can just ramble on for one more minute. So Secretary of State Blinken was in Seoul, I think, yesterday, talking at a conference that touches on some of these. And during that event, I believe it's the Deputy Prime Minister of Britain was talking about the Pope in the puffer jacket image that was circulating, I think, last year. And it's an AI-generated image. And what he said was, I know consciously that this is an AI-generated image, but to me, there's still, and forever will be, an association between the Pope and a puffer jacket. And what that says is there's a whole layer of unconscious influence, of like residual convincing that needs to play a role in our understanding of all of this, which is that it's not just disinformation that hits you in the face that's gonna be the problem, it's the aftershocks of that, the way it affects our foundational understanding of things. That's really hard to track because often the way it affects people, they don't know that it's happening in the first place. And I think that increasingly, because of AI, because the scale backs in content moderation, because of this war against disinformation, that's going to play a role in how we handle this going forward.
I think that's a really fantastic point. And just to pull the thread on the puffer jacket a little bit more, right? Like all of these things have elements of truth in them, right? And so while Pope Francis in and of himself is, seems to be at least, very much concerned for the poor, right? The Catholicism that I grew up with, the Catholic Church itself has a ton of wealth around the world, right? So like it pings on that grain of truth. I think to pull the thread a little bit more on the election problem set, all politics are local. We've heard this expression, for my entire life, right? But the information domain is global, right? So it's not that like like people tend to trust their local elections, right? They tend to think that their election is fine, but it's somebody else's over here that's the problem, right? And now, and Nina is living proof of this, right? Like you can have someone, in Moscow that's leading a harassment campaign. Well, how do you deal with that? You can't cut that person off of the internet because we don't have the authorities to do that. So the information fight is global in a lot of ways. And so while we can and we should take action to shore up the local, right? Because we need people, democracy is messy, right? That's one of the biggest things is, our global adversaries want to make democracy ungovernable. They do. Right? And we've always had a level of chaos in democracy, but now it's turned up to 11. And so I think we have to focus on shoring up the local elections, right? We have to get folks involved and know that like my election piece counted, right? And then we have to do a concerted effort across the board to help people understand, well, if you think this is true here, why not over here, right? But the other piece to this that is a really, really important piece, right, is there's a saying, from Robert Merton, mid-century sociologist, right? Beliefs that are real in their content are real in their consequences. So it doesn't matter if something is true or false, right? If you believe that something is real, it is going to drive your behavior, right? And that is true across the board, right? It doesn't have to be true for something to have a real effect. And we have seen this in the invasion of Ukraine. We've seen this with women's health issues. We've seen this, across the board. If you believe something is real, there are consequences there. So rather than getting at and trying to split the hair bears of true or false, right? Because it turns out there, with the exception of the lizard people, which I'm not sure where that conspiracy theory came from, right? It's supposedly a science fiction novel or whatever, but there's grains of truth in all of these things, right? When you start to really talk to people, there's elements in there, right? And we've got to do a better job of hearing folks and getting people recommitted to democracy. Lee used the term warrior earlier, and I despite being a service member, I don't like that term, right? Because war is actually not just going out and doing like warrior type things, right? War is making sure that you've done the right paperwork to make sure the beans, bullets, and bandages get where they're supposed to be, right? That you do the logistics. Democracy is messy. And we need people to show up and be committed to doing democracy. And that means sometimes that we're going to lose on some issues. We're going to have to compromise on some issues. How do we do that when it's like fundamental to your right to exist as a person? I don't know. So I don't have solutions everywhere. But this is a hard problem. And as he pointed out, right, our adversaries are really good at making our divisions seem insurmountable. Well, we have done this thing called democracy, right? Harriet Martineau, I'm trying to get her to replace de Tocqueville, so you guys can help me out with this. She wrote Society in America, right? And she traveled around America in the 1830s, right? And she wrote before de Tocqueville, and she talked to everyone. And the opening paragraph, she talks about an interview that she did with James Madison, and he said, "America has proven the impossible, that a people can self-govern." That's important. We have to give people something that's worth fighting for, that's worth showing up and doing every day. We have to tell a story about America that is both true, acknowledging all of the sins of our past, and inspiring. And we haven't done a good job with either one of those things. And those two things are factionalized on the left and the right in different ways. But we really have to, we have to make this stuff local. We have to recognize where people have been really hurt. We have to figure out how to support when they go after individuals and try to ruin individuals' lives, like what Nina has experienced, unfortunately. And we have to develop mechanisms to deal with that, right? We see cyber stalking happening, right? Someone just got, again, sometime in the last couple of years, got extradited from Hawaii for stalking people in different states, right? We have to figure out how to deal with that, and it's only getting worse. And the last thing is this is about tormenting individuals, right? It's breaking trust in the institutions, but it's also about tormenting individuals. If enough people go, I can't do this, I'm done, right? Well, then who's left to stand in the gap? So we have to come together. We have to come together with people we disagree with. I'm not at the hug a fascist point, but we have to come together with people we disagree with vehemently, and figure out how to do this thing called democracy. And that's hard, and the information environment is not incentivized. It is not built to do that. The platforms are built to make money. Zuckerberg famously said, company over country. Okay, what do we do with that?
Nina, Roman?
Sure. I have a few points here. So the first of all, disinformation and misinformation, they are technical terms. They have like real definition, right? So disinformation is wrong information with the malicious intent. Misinformation, wrong information without this intent, right? So we are not talking about something that is being extremely vague. Could they be used in political discussions to denigrate the term? Absolutely, yes, they can, and they are. Like fake news, it's just extremely bad thing that like should not be used on any circumstance right now. So our science is also like changing and developing, right? So we started from the term of the fake news and then quickly stopped using it, which is the right thing to do. And also what I wanted to also say is that in our work, like I work at the think tank, right? When we analyze this information, we're not looking at the we are looking at the content and occasionally fact check it, right? But we need to understand that in order to fact check, we need to prove that this is wrong, right? So you need to, when I'm saying that this is a wrong thing, right, or this is like a stolen picture or something, I provide the proof for it from the open sources. So that's extremely important. But what I wanted to say here is that we track mostly behavior, not the content. Content is secondary. We look at the behavior. So like creation of the sock puppet accounts. I know that we will have a session in a while how to do that. But how to create this so-called coordinated and authentic behavior. So we look into these things, how they're being spread rather than what they are saying, because those information that has been disseminated it might be partially true. It might be having, and a lot of time it has a kernel of truth, but wrapped in a like wonderful package of lies. Then about the coordination, it's hard to tell. I would rather perceive this pushback of the overall counter-disinformation field as overlapping interests of multiple actors that are sometimes actually having and participating in pushing back. And it seems like a coordination, but I'm not into conspiratorial thinking because I'm debunking it. You know this famous picture when there's like a lizard head and like pyramid head person and they're like playing some table game. I would rather avoid it. About the content moderation, I do not perceive this as a censorship per se, because platforms are private companies. Free speech does not equal free reach. And if there are some extremist content on those platforms, they could be, it could be taken down because they're essentially private companies. Can you have those opinions? Sure. Can you go to the public space and tell them? Yes. But it is not like, social media are not public places, it's private company, right? And they are providing you services. You know, you need to read through all of these wonderful hundreds of pages of agreement before like clicking continue, but nobody ever read this, right? So they can and do this thing. And finally, was it denialist science, right? The question that you asked. We went through it with different means of science in the last century. You have CEOs of cigarette companies testifying before Congress telling that cigarettes are not addictive. In 2 years, they were actually acknowledging that it is addictive. There is science proving that they are not addictive. The same goes with sugar, the same goes with climate change. You always need to understand and compare the amount of things that are being there, right? So if the 99 people tell you that there is climate change and one scientist tells you that there are not, it does not mean that you need to bring on the TV station 2 people from each camp and portray this as an equal. There is not equal, there is a consensus if like 99% of scientists are telling that this is actually a problem. But try to avoid equalizing those things because there is no equality in that. And disinformation is a real problem and we need there will be blowback. It is essential, right? People do not like to be wrong or being corrected. But we need to understand that and keep this in mind, but still moving forward because disinformation is a big problem.
I'm going to let you, I don't want to go over because I want to keep time for questions at the end. So I'll let you go.
Yeah, let me try to tie everything together. So there's a couple of things that I've always advocated for that have been brought up by Jessica and by Roman. Jessica's entire kind of stump speech about bringing things back to the local, making civic engagement reinvigorated, all of these sorts of things, giving people a reason to participate in democracy. I still believe in that. I also still believe in the power of open source. So at the Center for Information Resilience, we do very similar work to what DFR Lab does or Bellingcat. I know there's a Bellingcat person in the room. We look at things that people post online, and using that, we can tell a lot about what our adversaries are doing, the lies that they're telling, and the behavior that they're trying to exact in the real world. Unfortunately, with both of these things, both kind of localizing and reinvigorating civic engagement, as well as OSINT work, it kind of gets back to your conversation that you had with Peter. People don't care if things are false. People don't believe in engaging with the system because they think it's already rigged against them. And I've seen that in my own work and my own experience as well. The fact that the right-wing media machine was able to call the granddaughter of somebody who was in a gulag in Russia, somebody who wanted to censor, the fact that my work was all about media literacy and they said I was a woke fascist who wanted to take away free expression for Americans. I mean, it tells you everything you need to know about the way that people are engaging with their information environment right now. And I'm sorry if I sound like I'm beating a dead horse. I just think that this, again, is a really existential moment, and we need to rise to the challenge here. And so one of the things, and I can't give a lot of details yet, but you'll be hearing more from me in this space in coming months, because finally I've cleared out kind of the legal fires that have been percolating in my life, and I have time to do real proactive work now. And I think it is really important that we do more pushing back against this coordinated campaign, more peeling back of the curtain. And I will say, I do think it is coordinated. And Roman, my initial reaction was the same as yours. I was like, these are a bunch of like weirdos. They're all trying to get something for themselves. No, actually, I am increasingly convinced, right? We know for a fact that America First Legal is working with Jim Jordan's weaponization committee. When they get documents there, it's circulated through to these guys. You remember Stephen Miller from the White House? He's leading America First Legal. He's funding these lawsuits against all of the researchers, against some of the government entities, right? I would also assume they are working with Elon Musk and the Twitter Files guys. It's all one giant laundromat, and it is all coordinated. Also, if you look at the messaging against all of us, the talking points, it's not just coordinated like, oh, we were listening to Fox News. There is circulated stuff going around. They use the same words, depicting people in the same ways. Circulating the same experts. These folks are brought into congressional panels. It's coordinated, right? And I think we need to pull back kind of the curtain on the funding and the coordination and all of that. And that's something I intend to do. So watch this space.
Wow, I want to leave time for some questions. I want one thing I want to make sure to just to put a cap on some of what happened with the second question there is to remind us all of and I can't quote it perfectly from memory, from Hannah Arendt, who said, many years later, many decades later, commenting on her work, The Origins of Totalitarianism, she said that the thing that happens if you lie to people all the time is not that they will believe the lie, it's that they will become so demoralized, so cynical, that they begin to disengage, to lose their ability to do critical thinking and judgment. And with such a people, you can do anything you please. That's the connection, right? If they reach that point of exhaustion and cynicism and disengagement, that feeds right into the hands of autocracy, authoritarianism, and fascism. Thank you. Thank you all. What a wonderful commentary. I don't want to go over. I can see. Didn't see the clock before. There it is. 10:30. Right on time. 15 minutes for Q&A. Will somebody else be walking around with a microphone? How does this work? Oh, okay. So I'm going to leave it to you, and we've got a few questions.
Is this?
Yeah. It's up to you.
Okay. Hi, Jeff Trimble. Great panel. Really, really wonderful discussion. I think this question is for Nina, since you're not going to be here tomorrow, and we're going to have a panel on Russia and China. Could I draw you out just one step farther on the level of cooperation and collaboration, and you come from the background studying Russian disinformation. To what extent are the Russians still really players in what's happening now in the United States, or is it kind of they've fired it off and it's now self-perpetuating and they've backed away from it, or maybe somewhere in between? To what extent are the Russians, and if you want to say something about the Chinese, go ahead, but I wanted to draw you out on this since you're not going to be here for that panel tomorrow.
Yeah, I appreciate
Thanks.
that, Jeff. And one of the most frustrating things about the campaign against me is that for the past 2 years, I've talked about what's happened to me and not been able to talk about the thing that I have my degrees in and studied. And frankly, the thing that's really important right now with the war in Ukraine. So here's what I think, and this is what I've always said. And luckily, a lot of the conclusions in my first book, which was out in the lobby, thank you, that was lovely, really hold up today. And it's that Russia has never been creating falsehoods whole cloth, right? They exacerbate pre-existing fissures in our society. And I would say that right now we have a pretty big pre-existing fissure in the animosity, vitriol, and polarization that exists here. So when you see the folks saying things like, you know, disinformation is not real and the people who are involved in this industry are just part of a giant grift trying to self-enrich, Russia's very, very happy to play that up, right? Because they're saying, oh, all of these people who have been calling us out for the past 8 years are actually grifters, and here's an American who's saying that. We don't need to create a false account. We don't need a false amplifier to do that. We can just amplify Matt Taibbi or Rudy Giuliani or whomever, and use that in our own campaigns. And that's exactly what I think Russia is going to be doing. I don't see a need for Russia to attempt to create the networks that it created before, because those networks are kind of self-perpetuating here, and they can just amplify those in various ways. When we look at kind of China, Iran, and the rest of the adversarial information ecosystem, I encourage everybody to look at the Director of National Intelligence's 2022 report on election interference from the midterms. I found it really interesting about how and when different adversaries attempted, at least according to the IC, to interfere in different races. So China, during the midterms, interfered in races where it thought it could affect an outcome that was pro-Chinese, which is always how China has operated. Iran, again, very surgically interfered in certain ways. And I think given the heightened awareness of foreign interference, a lot of the foreign adversaries are making that same calculation. However, the IC also showed that the space is kind of blown open now, and alluded to nations like Cuba, for instance, attempting to interfere in the information environment. So I think with as many vulnerabilities as we have, and this is one of the things that really worries me, right? I was meant to be doing work countering disinformation in the name of protecting the homeland and national security. We're kind of asleep at the wheel for that. The Global Engagement Center, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and a number of other government agencies that have been on the front lines of this fight for the past 8 years, really the past 6 years, let's say that, have now been embattled. They are either under injunction from current lawsuits, or their employees are being hit with document and subpoena and interview requests from Congress. And if I were a government employee right now, especially a low-level government employee who was not a political appointee, who's just a civil servant, I would not be sticking my neck out to sound the alarm bell. And so that is what I'm most worried about. I mean, I think the Russians or whomever else could bumble their way along into success, because, again, there is that coordination that we built for so long, that was so hard fought, has now disintegrated under this pressure.
Can I just jump in really quickly on China, because this happens to be a topic that my team is currently fascinated with. We're looking a lot into spamouflage, which is we can quibble about whether or not it's a classic disinformation campaign or just a Chinese influence op, but this was discovered by researchers, I think, back in 2019, so it's been around for a while, but it seems to be pivoting right now, and it seems to suggest that China is increasingly following Russia's playbook in that instead of saying, wow, Beijing is great, look at all the fantastic things that China has done, it's now saying, wow, the US is a mess, you guys live in chaos, things are really not good. And kind of the most recent examples of this were that there were networks of fake accounts that were spreading AI-generated or AI-enhanced images showing the White House on fire, or the Statue of Liberty cracking, or Biden and Trump going at each other with flaming spears. And it's really telling how they're now turning to capitalize on this culture of unease and polarization.
Just to jump on that, I mean, if you think about what the goal is there, right? If we don't agree that Ukraine should win, right, and we now are debating about whether or not we should continue to fund, well, then Russia wins, right? If we don't agree that, Taiwan being a free nation should exist, well, then China can just cross the sea and take it over, right? Not discounting what the Taiwan people will do, but the chaos there is a feature for them, not a bug, because to do this thing called democracy, we have to come together and agree that certain things are important. And how do we debate about what the best mechanism is to, support American interests abroad, that make sure that we stand with our allies? That's actually really complicated. So our adversaries are really good at amplifying those things, because it gets at the fundamental thing that we're really good at, which is supporting, global conflict. Our allies that are in conflict. We're good at that, right? Until we're not. And if they can sow enough chaos and get us to go, okay, we're out. Good luck, everybody. You're on your own. Well, that's a whole new world, literally, and that's a very big problem.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody for a really great panel. My name is Vanessa Agnew. I'm from Academy in Exile and Technical University in Dortmund in Germany. And we support at-risk scholars who are in exile. And I wanted to say, Nina, I'm sorry to hear about your travails. Various people have underlined the fact that we can tackle content issues, we can tackle things systemically. I think what the point that you make, Nina, is that this is a huge time suck. One is prevented from doing one's work by being trolled, by being doxxed, by calls for documents. So I think this is an aspect that needs to be dealt with as well. How does one continue to do one's work when all of one's time is sucked up by having to deal with the kind of legal issues that one faces?
Yeah, this is a really important question that Jess and I were talking about a little bit in the bathroom before here. So one of the things that's important to me, and something that when I came into kind of my post-DHS life, I made sure to tell my new organization, like, I want to lead on this. Again, I mentioned we're in OSINT. Sometimes our investigators are kind of trolled. Luckily, no one has been hit to the degree that I had yet. But I wanted to make sure that we had an online abuse policy as an organization. And I know there are a lot of kind of investigative organizations and NGOs in the crowd. I want you to know that this is not just for governments, it's not just for newsrooms, it is for all of you as well. You need to think proactively about how to protect your people. That means signing them up for things like Delete Me or Canary, which wipe your private information off of the internet. This is more a concern for Americans and less for Europeans, because you guys have GDPR, lucky you. You need to think about investing in kind of other platforms. There used to be something called Block Party on Twitter that allowed you to kind of proactively block people who weren't following you or who were engaging in harassing behavior. There are other kind of middlewares that are being developed now for kind of the new online ecosystem. But also thinking about how you're going to support your employees if they're hit with legal requests, how you're going to support them in launching or filing requests with law enforcement, even if that's just a police report, or potentially thinking about protective orders, how you're going to help them preserve evidence, and how you're going to help them navigate trauma. It took me a really long time to kind of acknowledge, and perhaps this is because I was in my kind of postpartum life as it was all happening, but like how traumatic this was for me. And I like to think of myself as a strong and resilient person. And even so, I have a really hard time trusting people now. And so, making sure that your health insurance includes access to therapy, things like that. All of this is on the Center for Information Resilience's website. If you search like CIR online abuse policy, it's there. The broader questions about how we kind of help the community in terms of mutual aid responding, that is something that I think the academic and research community has really fallen flat on. There are some efforts to coordinate on that, but in terms of communications and then also in terms of the legal fight, it is extremely expensive. I am self-funding my lawsuit against Fox, but that hasn't even been the most expensive part yet, and my lawyers are working for free at the moment. It's been these frivolous lawsuits that have come to attack me that I've had to get dismissed, right? And that costs money. So thinking about some sort of mutual aid framework, I think, is where this needs to go, particularly if some of the worst visions of the future come to pass. We need to think about that. There's a lot of understandably, a lot of money and a lot of thought put into how to protect journalists, and I'm glad that has been changing for the better over the past couple of years, but we need to think about our sphere as well, and I think it's going to have to come from within.
Time for one last question.
I think he had his hand up.
Hi there, Kevin Lentz. Question for Roman. You mentioned that things were looking pretty good for Ukraine on the information side for the first half year, and then the Russians started learning. What was going on the other side of that equation with the Ukrainians? Were they unlearning or just being stagnant in their thinking about it, or did they just lose momentum? Be interested to hear your thoughts.
Thanks. That's a great question. No, what I'm saying is that it's extremely premature to say that somebody won information war. First of all, you cannot win something that is eternal. Basically, it's been there for a while. There's a fantastic book by Thomas Reed about active measures, dating a century ago or something. Even when kinetic will stop, the campaigns will continue anyway. So what happened is that on the first few months, there was like an enormous evidence that Russian messaging isn't working in Ukraine. They thought that like, oh, we'll come in and people will cheer us with flags. We cheer them with guns. So basically there's something different happened, right? But then they started to realize that, okay, in order to stop the war effort, they need to achieve a few things. First of all, they need to make people less willing to resist, right? So make them resilient. So we need to find some clashes in the society and amplify them, as it was before. But it was a change of tactic, because the initial messages were like, oh, brotherly nations, yay, we're not bombing civilian buildings, etc. They are. But these were like refuted, and Ukrainian information space like covered it like flawlessly. But then they started getting back to their old tactics. So like the main platform in Ukraine right now is Telegram. And it is heavily ridden with Russian and pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin disinformation out there. It's quite easily flowing. And they are trying to influence different kinds of population. And also they started doubling down on the problematic issues that are felt problematic for people, right? So it's like military losses, conscription, corruption as well. It's not that Ukraine lost, so don't get me wrong. We are like putting up the good fight. We are doing okay, but Russians had some successes, and that's what I wanted to point out, that they're not lost absolutely and fully and totally. No, there are like some campaigns that were a bit successful, like this campaign that I alluded on the TikTok. It received millions of views in Ukraine and abroad. It's like AI-narrated videos, or like, oh, Reznikov, former Minister of Defense, bought some villa in, I don't know, French Riviera or whatever. But you could like reversibly search this image and find that this is still for sale, so anybody could buy it. If you have 7 or 8 million euros, go ahead. And that's the thing. People believed into this stuff. So genuine people commented on it, shared this. So yeah, there are some successes, but and we are underfunded. So we're like always like the counter effort is underfunded. So this is like an unequal fight, even though we are pretty successful, and the baseline is maybe somewhat in our favor, but it's not as it was in the first 2 months when it was like absolutely like, I don't know, 99-1. Now it's 60-40, I guess. Makes sense.
Thank our distinguished panel for a great discussion.